Greetings from the heart of the Asia-Pacific tension, where diplomacy meets destiny and one leader stands under the spotlight that the world cannot ignore. Before we begin, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep and emotional analyses of global issues that shape our shared future, because what you are about to witness is not merely politics, but a story of identity, ambition, and transformation unfolding in real time. Today, the world turns its gaze toward Gyeongju, South Korea, where the APEC Summit 2025 brings together 21 economies that represent over half of global GDP. But in the middle of this high-stakes arena, all eyes are fixed on one figure: Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto, whose direction could redefine not only Indonesia's trajectory, but the balance of influence across Asia. For decades, Indonesia has been seen as a sleeping giant quietly rising through stability, democracy, and economic growth. Yet under Prabowo's leadership, the nation stands ready to assert itself more boldly at the global stage, and the APEC summit has become the perfect theater for this act of power diplomacy. The question now is not just what policies Prabowo will bring, but how his approach will navigate the complex web of alliances between East and West, and what message Indonesia will deliver to a world desperate for leadership, clarity, and courage. In an era marked by polarization and distrust, the arrival of Prabowo Subianto at the APEC summit has become more than a diplomatic event. It is a symbol of Asia's shifting center of gravity, as leaders from the United States, China, Japan, and South Korea converge, each with their own agendas and fears. Indonesia's voice carries a new weight, not because of its military or economy alone, but because of its moral and strategic balance. It represents a bridge between rival blocs and a promise of unity in a fractured world, something that few nations today can claim. Prabowo's speech, scheduled on the second day of the summit, has already stirred expectations. Will he align Indonesia with the rising Asian bloc led by Beijing, or reaffirm Jakarta's traditional, non-aligned policy anchored in independence and cooperation? Behind closed doors, diplomats whisper that his tone could determine whether the region moves toward new partnerships or deepens its divisions, and the tension in those hallways feels almost like history waiting to be written. Every summit brings diplomacy, but this one carries rivalry, from old wounds between East and West to the silent race for dominance between Middle Eastern funds and East Asian technology. Each nation moves its chess piece cautiously. For countries like Japan and South Korea, the concern is clear: a more assertive Indonesia could tilt trade patterns, energy alliances, and security dialogues towards Southeast Asia, shifting the balance of investment away from the northern economies. Meanwhile, China sees opportunity. It views Indonesia as a natural partner to expand its Belt and Road vision across maritime routes. But this cooperation also risks fueling suspicion from Western powers who fear a new axis forming quietly under their radar. And in the middle of it all, Prabowo must speak with a voice that balances friendship and firmness, offering cooperation without surrender, independence without isolation, and pride without arrogance. Indonesia's strength lies in its identity. An archipelago that has endured colonization, revolution, and reform now stands as the world's fourth most populous nation, with a cultural diplomacy rooted in humility and resilience. Prabowo embodies both a military man's decisiveness and a statesman's pragmatism, and that combination makes the world listen, because he speaks from a history of struggle and a future of hope. At APEC, this duality becomes his greatest weapon. Indonesia does not come to take sides, it comes to lead from the middle, to show that leadership can exist without dominance and influence without intimidation. And yet that middle path grows thinner every year as the tension between Washington and Beijing turns every neutral ground into contested space, making Indonesia's diplomatic balancing act both courageous and perilous. The summit's agenda may read like trade and technology, but beneath the surface lies a competition for control of tomorrow's economy. Artificial intelligence, energy transition, and defense innovation are no longer just economic topics, they are tools of influence. Indonesia's growing partnerships with South Korea and the Middle East for green energy projects have already placed it at the center of economic negotiation tables, and investors from Europe are watching carefully, wondering where Prabowo will lean. If Indonesia embraces Asia's collective manufacturing and technology power, it could become the next economic core of the Indo-Pacific. Yet, if it maintains its open-door policy toward Western investment, it could be the bridge that unites rather than divides. This choice, however, will not be made in speeches, but in policy follow-ups, trade deals, and defense cooperation that will define the region's power structure for decades. In global politics, image is power, and Prabowo knows that better than most. His leadership style, firm, traditional yet reformist, has made him a fascinating figure to international observers. His presence at APEC is not just political, it is personal. It signals the reawakening of Indonesia's historical narrative as a nation that defines itself not by imitation, but by innovation and identity. Cultural diplomacy becomes his hidden weapon, from batik gifts at high-level meetings to narratives of maritime unity. Prabowo uses culture not as decoration, but as diplomacy, soft power that reaches hearts beyond headlines. And in a world tired of dominance, Indonesia's gentle confidence feels refreshing. It carries emotional resonance because it reminds the world that strength can be kind and leadership can be rooted in heritage. Behind the closed meeting rooms, there are quiet confrontations, while public smiles and cameras capture unity. Private discussions reveal differences deep enough to divide economies. Some nations push for protectionism, others for free trade, while digital sovereignty and data control become new battlegrounds for influence. Reports suggest Indonesia's delegation has become the most sought-after meeting partner, as everyone wants to understand Prabowo's true intent. Will he champion an independent Asian supply chain or align with global frameworks led by the West? Every handshake carries a question, and every photograph hides a strategy, because in this summit diplomacy is theater, but also war in another form. For too long, global summits have been dominated by northern voices, but under Prabowo, Indonesia brings the voice of the global south with authenticity and assertiveness. He speaks for developing nations who want growth without dependence and progress without losing culture, for those who are often invited to tables, but rarely allowed to lead the conversation. At APEC, his words become a message of equality, reminding the world that true development cannot come from hierarchy, but from partnership, from understanding that diversity is not weakness, but strength. That message resonates beyond Asia, reaching Africa, Latin America, and small island nations who see in Indonesia's path a reflection of their own struggle for dignity and recognition. Every leader's policy is written in paper, but Prabowo's approach carries emotion drawn from history of unity forged through struggle and pride born from independence. When he speaks of cooperation, he speaks as a soldier who has seen the cost of division. When he mentions peace, it is not abstract, it is survival, and that emotional truth is what makes his diplomacy so human. Observers feel it, journalists note it, audiences sense it. This is not just politics, it is storytelling of a nation reclaiming its narrative. And perhaps that is why global attention on Indonesia feels different. It is no longer curiosity, it is respect. As the summit nears its final days, conversations begin to shift toward the future, and whispers of a new Asian economic alliance rise quietly in the background. Could Indonesia be at the center of a new bloc that balances East and West, not to replace APEC, but to reshape it from within to reflect the reality of a multipolar world? This idea sparks both excitement and fear, because a united Asia led by middle powers like Indonesia, South Korea, and Malaysia could challenge the existing hierarchy of trade and influence. Whether this becomes reality or remains rumor will depend on the choices made in Gyeongju and the tone of Prabowo's closing statement, which might become one of the most quoted speeches in recent regional history. As the final session unfolds, the world holds its breath once more, not just to hear what Prabowo will say, but to feel the pulse of a changing era. Every camera, every journalist, every diplomat watches Indonesia's leader as if witnessing a pivot in history, and perhaps they are, because in times of uncertainty, the world does not just look for power, it looks for vision. Prabowo's message may not please everyone, but it will resonate with those who believe Asia's strength lies in its unity, diversity, and balance, values that Indonesia has carried for centuries. And when the summit ends and the lights fade, what remains will not be applause, but a question echoing across continents: what direction will Asia take next, and who will lead it? And that brings us to the end of our journey through the corridors of power at APEC 2025, where diplomacy met destiny and Indonesia's voice echoed across the Pacific. If this story moved you or made you think about how the world is changing, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, because your engagement helps us continue bringing stories that matter, stories that connect hearts, minds, and nations. In a time when the world stands divided, one message remains clear: unity cannot be imposed, it must be built, and Indonesia's leadership reminds us that influence is not about domination, but about direction, about inspiring trust where others build walls. This is more than politics, it is the pulse of a continent finding its rhythm again, and as always, thank you for watching until the next story from the crossroads of history and humanity.